Have you ever just stopped and wondered what makes one person follow the rules to the letter while someone else just doesn't? It's a question that really gets to the core of how our entire society functions. In this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain on the hidden social forces that shape our choices. We'll look at why we conform, how we learn to rebel, and maybe most importantly, who gets to write the rules in the first place.
So, right off the bat, let's tackle this huge question. Is it all just about someone's personality, their individual moral compass? Or could it be that there are these bigger, invisible social currents pushing and pulling on us, shaping our behavior in ways we don't even see? Well, it turns out sociology has some really fascinating and honestly kind of surprising answers to that puzzle.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to dive into 4 powerful ideas. First up, we'll look at what keeps us on the straight and narrow. Then, we'll flip that and see how people actually learn to step out of line. After that, we'll uncover the incredible, sometimes scary, power of a simple label. And finally, we'll ask the biggest question of all: who really benefits from the rules as they are? Okay, let's kick things off with conformity. Because really, before we can figure out why people break the rules, we have to ask an even more basic question. Why do most of us follow them most of the time? This is where a really cool idea called control theory comes in. It gives us a great framework for understanding this.
The big idea here is actually pretty simple, but it's also really profound. Our behavior is basically controlled by our connections. According to control theory, we play by the rules when we have these strong social bonds tying us to our community. But when those bonds get weak or break, well, that's when deviance starts to look a lot more likely.
At its heart, this all boils down to a fundamental human thing. We crave approval. We don't want to disappoint our family, our friends, our teachers. We conform because the social price of not conforming, of losing face, it just feels too high. It's that gut feeling of not wanting to let people down that really keeps our behavior in check.
Control theory actually breaks this down into 4 specific kinds of bonds that keep us tied to society. First up, you've got attachment. That's just our connection to other people, like family and friends. Second is commitment. Think of this as everything you've invested in your life, like a career or getting an education, that you'd risk if you broke the rules. Third is involvement. This one's easy, just being busy with positive stuff. School, sports, a job. If you're busy with those, there's just less time to get into trouble. And finally, there's belief. This is when we actually genuinely buy into the idea that society's rules are fair and right. When all 4 of these bonds are strong, conformity is the most likely outcome.
Okay, so if strong bonds pull us toward conformity, what pushes us toward deviance? Let's jump to our next theory, which basically flips the whole question on its head. It suggests that deviance isn't some kind of failure of control, but actually a form of learning.
And this, right here, perfectly shows that massive shift in thinking. Control theory is all about the forces that hold us back. But differential association theory, it's about the forces that actively teach us to be deviant. It's not about what we're missing, it's about what we're surrounded by.
So, the key takeaway here is that we learn to break the rules in pretty much the same way we learn anything else, from the people we hang out with. I mean, think about it. If your whole group of friends thinks it's no big deal to cheat on a test, you're way more likely to start seeing it that way too. It really is all about who you associate with.
Now, this slide breaks down exactly how that learning happens. There are 3 key factors. First, the ratio. Are you simply around more people who break rules than people who follow them? Second, the relationship. We are much, much more influenced by people we care about and look up to. And finally, age. The younger we are, the more like sponges we are, making it easier to soak up these behaviors.
So far we've talked about inner controls and outer influences. But our third theory brings a much more radical idea to the table. What if deviance isn't something a person is, but something society creates, just by slapping a label on them?
Now this is a total game changer. Labeling theory argues that no act in and of itself is deviant. It only becomes deviant when society reacts to it and labels it that way. So deviance isn't really about the act itself. It's all about the social response to the act. And the consequences of getting labeled are huge. They can create something sociologists call a stigma, this incredibly powerful negative label that totally changes how everyone sees you. That one single label, like felon or addict, can become what's known as a master status. What that means is it completely overshadows every other part of who you are, a parent, a friend, a talented artist, and it basically locks you into that deviant role in society's eyes.
So this brings us to a super critical question.
If society is the one creating the labels and the rules, who in society gets to hold the pen? Our final theory, conflict theory, says that to really get to the bottom of deviance, we have to look at power and inequality.
Conflict theory doesn't see society as a big, happy family working together. It sees it as a battlefield for scarce resources and power. From this point of view, the group with the most power, the ruling class, gets to decide what's normal and what's deviant. They create the laws and the belief systems that protect their top spot. So any behavior that threatens their power, well, that gets labeled as deviant and often criminalized.
And this slide really shows the real-world consequences of this dynamic. When we look at the data from federal prisons for drug offenses, we see a huge disproportionate impact. While white people make up the biggest slice of the U.S. population, this data shows us that Black and Latino people are locked up for these offenses at rates way higher than their share of the population. Conflict theory would argue that this isn't some random coincidence, but a direct result of who holds the power in the legal system and who ends up being targeted by its rules.
So why does this disparity happen? Well, conflict theory points to a few systemic issues. For one, people with less money simply can't afford the same quality of legal defense. We also see that, historically, crimes against white victims have been punished a lot more severely. And then there's this process called victim discounting. This is where the justice system kind of implicitly decides a crime is less serious based on the social status of the victim. An assault in a wealthy suburb might trigger a massive police response, while the exact same crime in a poor neighborhood gets a much weaker one.
And all of this leads us to our final and most critical question. After exploring why we conform, how we learn to be deviant, and how labels get applied, we're left with this thought right here. If the rules are social creations, not some kind of absolute truth, then we have to ask ourselves, who were they designed to protect, and who do they really truly serve?